Good morning. Welcome to Victory by Faith Fellowship, our Sunday school hour. We're glad you're joining us wherever you may be joining us from. And if this is your first time joining us, we welcome you. We invite you to go to our website at vbff.org. And there's a submission form, excuse me, at the bottom of the front page. And we ask you to go drop us a message. Let us know how you heard about us, where you're listening from and watching us from. And whether you watch us on YouTube or on Facebook, that helps us to know where we need to, put more efforts into reaching out. And if you're one of our regular followers, we invite you, share this link with someone, send it to someone, ask them to come join you this morning. And we're here Sunday school at 10 o'clock, our morning worship will be about 11:20ish. And then we will not have Wednesday service, Wednesday Bible discussion this coming Wednesday. We're doing it every other Wednesday. So a week from Wednesday, we'll have our Bible discussion as we are looking at Psalm 22. And so we invite you to come join us a week from Wednesday at 6:30, and as we do our Bible discussion. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Russ, and he's going to come bring us our Sunday school lesson. Was it not so long?
Good morning. Today we are on the second session of our unit, Staying True in a World Far from God. For those who grow up in church, our first thought concerning Daniel is likely of the king throwing him into the lion's den. This century-old story highlights the world's antagonism toward the things of God and his followers. The division between the world's standards and God's is not a thin line in the sand. Today it is a vast chasm. The differences are seemingly becoming greater at an ever-increasing rapid rate. Daniel in the lion's den is but one snapshot from the life of a prophet who remained faithful when kings and companions challenged him to forsake God. The book of Daniel portrays him as unashamed, unwavering, and unwilling to compromise in his devotion to God. One behavior that stands out to the reader is Daniel's faithfulness in prayer. Another is his willingness to show courage. Daniel thus serves as a model for believers who want to stand strong today despite the world's disapproval and opposition, or even its resentfulness and animosity. Daniel remained unashamedly faithful. We can too. Last week we went over the first session, which is develop strong convictions. Today's session is about pray with passion. It's common for all of us, even non-Christians, to pray and ask God for help when a problem arises. If you're ever on a plane, which I've never been, but I've heard that it's pretty common for people to pray when there's turbulence. Don't know about that, but just putting that out there. Whether they're Christian or not. That's okay, because God invites all people to pray and talk with Him. But we should ask ourselves, am I seeking God, or am I just seeking an answer from Him? Daniel and his friends needed God's help. They prayed, God answered, and Daniel kept the focus on God and not just on the answer he gave. The point of today's lesson is our prayers do make a difference. Prayer is one of the most important tools that we have as a Christian. It's something that should be the first response, regardless of the situation, whether it be about praying about a problem, praying with thankfulness, thanking God for the things that He has done for us. prayer is something that should always be like our speed dial, because it really is. It should always be our first response to anything. When someone asks you questions about God and you need an answer, pray about it. And you don't have to go. There should have a time set aside for you to go inside in your closet and pray. But when you're in those situations, just a quick "Please help me, Lord" in your head, and it's just God still hears that, and He answers those prayers too. And so even if it's just a quick "Please help me, Lord," or a long 30-minute prayer, God hears all of it, and it's all important. Everything we pray for are heard by God, and God acts on all of them. Our scripture this morning comes from the book of Daniel, chapter 2, verses 13 through 23, as well as 27 through 28a. This event occurred in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. The second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign began April 603 BC, and was the third year of training for the exiled Hebrews. The second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign ended in April 602 BC, and Daniel and his colleagues had been taken captive in the summer of 605 BC. Last week, I talked about how the Israelites had, from the days of Solomon onwards, been increasingly getting deeper and deeper into the sin of idolatry and many other wicked things. And because of their sin and their reluctance, and because of their not turning to God, prophet after prophet, plague after plague was put against them. They never turned. They would say that, well, we're going to go back to God, but then literally like a year, 10 years later, they go back to the exact same thing and even do worse things than what they did before, did it more. And it got to the point where God had them attacked, banished to different empires and different countries away from the promised land. He had to break them up so that he can build them back up again eventually, because they're at such a point where if they were together, if something didn't happen, they would just be like every other country, every other city in the world, and that's not what they were supposed to be. God called them, set them apart from everybody else. They were His chosen people, and He wanted more from them, more better for them than what they were doing, to be different from those around them. And so as this group of people in Daniel and his friends and a bunch of other Hebrews were taken into captivity into Babylon. Now Babylon is, as we talked about last week, a very extensive empire that conquered all of Syria, Palestine, and it's a pretty wide area for an empire. And there was many different cities, many different cultures that were assimilated into Babylon. Many different cultures and religions. And what that means is that Babylon had, because they would take the people and teach them the ways of the Babylonians so they could help that empire grow more and be better sustained and become men of letters, I believe it is called. And so all these different religions were taken with these people into Babylon. And so Babylon became like a melting pot of all these different religions, false gods. And so if you would just name one thing, one attribute of something, and someone would have an answer, well, that God is, blah, blah, blah. And it was just, if there was something, like if anyone had a question about, like, well, who's the God of this, there would be an answer, even if it was wrong. Because in those days, they weren't, now they're mythologies, but back then they were religions. And so these people were very adamant about, when Babylon would conquer a city or different civilizations, they would have these, they would be fearful of these gods too, because they were fearful of their own gods. And so they'd be, well, I'm not going to offend anybody. Otherwise, plagues, things like that would happen, or that's what they believed. And so I'm going to add them into our own thing. Just completely, put them in there, rename them. Like, this guy's actually this guy. And so it's actually kind of smart in a foolish way. So you would, when you would encounter these different cultures, they would go up and be like, well, actually, you're not going to break any of your different things that your God told you to do because your God is actually just one of our gods. And that's kind of their, the way that they did things. Eventually, Rome would have a similar kind of culture because it would be like the Babylon after Babylon. And it's all very interesting. And as we'll see, unlike the Hebrews though, God didn't have a major presence as all these other ones did there. Like you'll see how all the other one has different names like diviners, mediums, sorcerers, different names for their practices, but you don't ever have one for Daniel or his friends. They're always just wise men. They're never God is our God, the only true God, is never really acknowledged by these Babylonians. And so today we're going to see how our God is greater than all the fake gods and how he was able to do something that they weren't. Now that brings us to our first question. When have you ever felt foolish about how to fix something? There, a lot of things there's something that man can't fix regardless of how we go about it in our own power, and that is sin, that is temptation. And so we all face these things, and we, especially when we try to approach it without Jesus' help, and we'll try again about how exactly are we going to not do this? How are we going to stay away from this? And we fail time and time again. And so you can get to the point where it's like, well, obviously nothing's going to fix this. Mm-hmm. Jesus knocks on the door. But, we don't have a way of doing it without Jesus. We can try and find the answer, but the answer is Jesus. And regardless of where you go, you're never going to find a better answer than that actually works. You're not going to be able to find an answer on the internet or Google that's better than, Jesus Christ. Let us pray. Father God, thank you for this day. Thank you for one more day to just go about and do your work, Lord. Every day that we wake up, Lord, is a gift from you. I pray for all those that that are watching this, everybody just that around the world, Lord, that their burdens be lessened according to your will, Lord. That your healing hand be upon them, whatever sickness, illness, things like that they are dealing with, Lord. I pray that they know that you're with them every step of the way. That no matter how hopeless the situation seems, that you're there to answer their prayers when they pray. That you're there looking after them every step of the way. In Jesus' holy name, amen. Our first section this morning is from the book of Daniel, chapter 2, verses 13 through 16. The decree was issued that the wise men were to be executed, and they searched for Daniel and his friends to execute them. Then Daniel responded with tact and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to execute the wise men of Babylon. He asked Arioch, the king's officer, "Why is the decree from the king so harsh?" Then Arioch explained the situation to Daniel. So Daniel went and asked the king to give him some time so that he could give the king the interpretation. Daniel responded with tact and discretion to the king's demand, requesting time to seek the dream and its interpretation. Nebuchadnezzar is the king of the Babylonians at this time. And what exactly was it that troubled the king was that he had dreams, either one dream or many times or many different dreams, that troubled him to such an extent that he wasn't able to sleep. That sounds pretty bad. But he wasn't able to sleep, and so he called on many of the groups of wise men in Babylon to help him figure out what exactly this dream means, so he could come up with a way to stop having a dream. Some of the groups of people he called were magicians, those skilled in magical lore. Mediums can refer to either necromancers, those who are involved in the occult, or who claim to contact the dead, or astrologers, the ones who seek answers from the stars and constellations. Sorcerers refers to those who use incantations or witchcraft. They would believe in casting spells on others. Chaldeans refer to a special group of astrologers or wise men, and they were considered the wisest of the wise men. Although Daniel and his friends were hunted alongside the Babylonian wise men, they were not part of any guild, pagan priestly class, or occult order. Like the other wise men were, their reliance was on God, not magic or witchcraft. The reason why they were being hunted was because even though all these groups of people, all these people that were supposedly wise in their certain practices, couldn't find out what the dream meant, and so they were considered failed. There was no purpose for wise men who couldn't answer why this was happening, and so Nebuchadnezzar was going to have them all killed. It says that this occurred during the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, but as we know from the last lesson, Daniel and his friends were taught for 3 years, and if it was a second year, how could they already be done with the 3 years? And it's rather simple in the way that, when you send your kids to college, or when people go to college, you usually say that they're gone for 4 years, but usually they're just gone from like May of the first year, all of the second, third, and then come back in like August of the fourth year. In the same way, it's probably that Daniel and his friends were probably at the end of the first year, all of the second year, and a bit of the third year. It's also interesting is that the Babylonians don't count the first year of Nebuchadnezzar as the first year of his reign. So after his father died, when he became king, a year after that point, when it comes back to that day, then it would be starting the first year of his reign. Daniel chapter 2 verse 1 tells us Nebuchadnezzar had dreams that troubled him, and sleep deserted him. Dreams is plural in the original text. Nebuchadnezzar had more than one dream, or the same dream more than once. Further, he was troubled by these dreams, meaning he was deeply disturbed by them, so much so he could not sleep. And so he summoned the various groups, magicians, mediums, sorcerers, and Chaldeans. The fact that Nebuchadnezzar would summon the 4 groups together shows the desperateness of his situation. The decree was issued. This was the edict Nebuchadnezzar had ordered concerning the wise men and their fate. The fact this order was issued seems to imply that some time was needed to locate, arrest, and prepare the various wise men for execution. And even though that not all of the wise men actually went to the king, they were all, put into the edict. So even if they weren't a part of those 4, groups of people, the sorcerers, mediums, they were still going to be executed. Because those people were considered the best of the best. And so if that's the case, then everyone else would have failed too. Or at least that would be the common thing. Or maybe he was just really angry and couldn't see past that. Either way, had the same effect. To be executed. Nebuchadnezzar had declared that these failed wise men would be torn limb from limb, and that their houses would be made a garbage dump. The form of the expression suggests the slaughter of the wise men had not yet begun. I'd hope so, because that seems rather painful. Searched for. The words do not mean Daniel and the other young men were in hiding, only that they had not been in the meeting and their specific location had yet to be determined. Arioch. Arioch is the captain of the king's guard. The term guard in this case means to slay, so we should understand that Arioch was the king's chief executioner. He had gone out to execute the wise men of Babylon. Apparently, Arioch responded well to Daniel's demeanor and explained the situation. Possibly, Arioch was also the one who made it possible for Daniel to meet with the king. When informed of the king's edict, Daniel did not respond in fear or anger. Neither did he attempt to run away or argue with Arioch. Rather, Daniel responded to him with tact and discretion. To respond with tact is to respond with literally taste, in the sense of good taste. Discretion involved a response that was appropriate, prudent, and full of wisdom, suitable to the situation and to the person in his position to whom Daniel was speaking. If we had cops knocking on our door telling us you're arrested for murder, never before you had, not even arrested, you're about to get the death sentence for murder. You never heard about the person that you supposedly murdered, never met him in your life. What would you do? Would you be like, well, let's talk about this, or would you run out the back door? Personally, I would probably run out the back door. I'm 17, I'm not that smart. But Daniel here was very smart in the fact that he didn't allow his rational fear for his life to prevent him from responding in such a way that would actually save his life. And it's very common that when we presented a situation that we could, if we're confronted with death, we would be overwhelmed with fear and run the other way. Not Daniel. Daniel had God on his side. And so do you. So harsh. Harsh can mean both severe and hasty or urgent. Daniel's tact and discretion in his response to Arioch caused Arioch to explain the situation to Daniel, to one already under the king's sentence of death. Verse 13 is only a brief summary of what must have been a longer and fuller exclamation. The idea that Arioch, even though he already had his orders, he was a simple man doing his job, he was already told the wise men would be executed. It was a gift from God, God's grace, that had him halt and be like, what if Daniel might be able to solve this problem? If Arioch were more simple-minded, he would have just done his job and be done with it. Go home, sleep, probably not lose a wink of sleep. But Daniel, because he, did the will of God, he didn't run in the other direction. In fact, stayed where he was and listened, kind of like, please help me, Lord. And to get through that with the many things that he was taught in those 3 years of study, God moved Arioch's heart to be able to just pause, wait a minute, let's see what Daniel has to say. Right. And that's pretty unlikely in any other type of scenario. So it kind of just points out how good our God is, and the fact that, what's usually common, what usually is supposed to happen, doesn't happen because the Lord is good. Sometime, clearly Daniel, as one of the condemned, would not have been able to boldly enter the king's presence without having been granted an introduction, which Arioch may have arranged. Daniel first asked the king to give him some time. Daniel promised he would give the king the interpretation of his dream. Also note that when Daniel made this promise, the king's dream was unknown to him. The length of time Daniel asked for is unspecified, but must have been understood by the king to be reasonable. Thus the king granted Daniel's request. The interpretation. Daniel promised the interpretation, but to know the interpretation presupposed knowing the dream itself. Obviously, if the king was to be able to judge whether Daniel had interpreted the dream correctly, Nebuchadnezzar had not forgotten the contents of his dream. Now, the thing that you have to note is that Nebuchadnezzar didn't disclose the contents of his dream to anybody. In fact, with all the hype around these groups of people, he probably figured that these people would already know what the dream was, could figure out what it was and then tell him. And so the fact that they couldn't prove that they weren't who they say they were, didn't have the powers that they said they did. And so Daniel, not only was he supposed to be able to interpret what the dream meant, he was supposed to do so without even knowing what the dream was. Which would prove that, because obviously Daniel doesn't, but God does. Mm-hmm. So, good reason to pray. Now, about what Daniel did and did not do when talking to Arioch. He didn't panic, argue, threaten, or get defensive with Arioch. He did show difference, speak respectively, and demonstrate tact. He didn't ask for the situation. He was looking to draw he wasn't looking to draw attention to himself. He did ask for more time, knowing he would pray and ask God for an answer. That brings us to our second question. Why do we seem to wait until matters become urgent before seeking God? A good general idea of why would be pride, especially when it seems like it's not that urgent, could be happening months down the line, and it's just, well, I think I can handle that, or well, I'll do that a little later, or I can always pray later. Things like that can cause us to wait and thus waste time doing something else, whether that's important or not. And so the problem, although it's out of our minds, put over there somewhere, it eventually comes back, like all problems do, and confronts us. And it's at that point where we're kind of shocked back to reality. It's like, oh, I got to pray about this now. And hopefully it's not too late by that time. Usually, if you have a friend, sometimes your friend is like, you got to take care of this bill right now. And then, good friends like that help a lot. And so a good thing to do is that whenever you have a problem, it's easy to get distracted by things. So just put aside 15 minutes or something like that and just pray about it. Go into your prayer closet, do something like that. Pray about the problem. Don't let it just be I'll pray about it later, because later becomes a year from now, and that's not good. Or later becomes tomorrow, and then a week, and then 2 weeks. And so when you're confronted with a problem, pray to God about it immediately. God already knows the problem, but you need to ask God, otherwise, because God's gonna just, knock at the door, and unless you start praying, unless you open that door to let Him in, He can't deal with the situation because you're dealing with it. So, next we will see cultural differences between the Babylonians and the Hebrew. Never mind. Our second section this morning is from Daniel chapter 2, verses 17 through 19. Then Daniel went to his house and told his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, about the matter, urging them to ask the God of the heavens for mercy concerning this mystery, so Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of Babylon's wise men. The mystery was then revealed to Daniel in a vision at night, and Daniel praised the God of the heavens. Daniel and his friends turned in prayer to the only one who could answer. One of the overarching messages of the book of Daniel is that the God he worshipped, Yahweh, is the one true living God. Unlike the false gods the Babylonians worshipped, this was in part what was behind the title Daniel used for God, the God of the heavens. God, the creator of everything, is therefore higher than everything else. We hear about a bunch of other religions, a bunch of other mythologies, and us as humans like to explain things we don't understand in ways that, well, obviously there's a higher power, and our higher power is higher than any other higher power, as evident with Daniel's story, as he, everybody else couldn't answer it. The Medians, who would probably pray to their gods, and all the other wise men would pray to their gods, and they couldn't get an answer. But God did. God knew what the dream was before Nebuchadnezzar even had it. God knew the answer to what it meant before the question even came up. God already knows how to deal with the situation. All we have to do is let Him in. He already planned in advance for that situation. He's already at the door with his toolbox in hand, ready to just start getting to work. But if we don't let Him in, he can't do the work yet, because we have free will. And so if we're standing here with our broken wrench, trying to fix something, trying to fix it ourselves because, we think that we can, and God's at the door with the best wrenches possible, the best equipment you could ask for, better than best, about to, completely fix it up in seconds. But instead we wait and we make the situation get worse and get worse and get worse. So it's better just open the door. Daniel went to his house. These words indicate Nebuchadnezzar granted Daniel's request for more time, and that Daniel was living in the city of Babylon at the time of the edict. Daniel's friends, who either lived with him in the same residence or gathered to him, are appropriately identified here in a context of prayer to their true God by their Hebrew names. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah have the pagan names that they were given when they arrived in Babylon, which are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But at this moment, they are called by their Jewish names, the ones that they were given at birth, which have significance to, names like Yahweh is my help, and things like that. Their names are significant when in terms of, they all have something to do with Yahweh, which is, pretty cool names. The matter. The whole desperate situation is summed up in one term. It kind of makes the problem seem little compared to God, which it is. So it puts it in the way that, the tying up literally would be the death of Daniel and his friends if the answer didn't come to them. And just summing it up, well, that's that, but here's God. To ask God, Daniel urged his young associates to turn to God in prayer and unite together in doing so. Elsewhere in Scripture, we are informed that the prayer of a righteous person is very powerful in its effect, and that if two of you on earth agree about any matter that you pray for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. Later, Daniel acknowledged the help of his praying friends. The God of the heavens. This expression is important for a few reasons. First, the expression emphasizes that Daniel and his friends prayed to the one and only true God. Second, it reminds us of the true God's sovereignty and that the answer to their prayers would come from heaven. And third and finally, the Babylonians worshiped the gods of the sun, moon, and stars. But the God these four young men prayed to was over all the heavens, that is, over the sun, moon, and stars, and all the Babylonian astral gods. Mercy. The content of Daniel and his friends' prayer was that they would not be destroyed with the rest of the Babylonian wise men. For that they needed God's mercy. Mercy refers to compassion and is used here in the plural to emphasize the intensity of the mercies for which the four prayed. The word rendered mystery occurs only in the book of Daniel and in the Old Testament. Only in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. It became a technical term for that which can only be understood by God's revelation because it relates to God's hidden purposes in history. In the New Testament, Paul referred to the mystery made known to me by revelation. Here the word refers to the content of Nebuchadnezzar's dream concerning future world kingdoms. That Daniel learned both what Nebuchadnezzar's dream was and its interpretation was a case of supernatural wisdom. The expression, while passive, means God revealed it to Daniel. This knowledge was not something Daniel had acquired on his own by his own wisdom. It had to come from God by way of special revelation. You can't guess a dream, something that literally, most commonly, is something that you're just thinking of at the time of your dream and it becomes reality in your dream. You can't guess that, something so uncertain, and the supposed interpretation of something. So that type of answer would need something more than what a human brain could come up with. A vision at night. God's answer to their prayers came to Daniel in a vision at night. Where the four had gone to sleep after praying, or continued into the night in prayer, we are not told. God had gifted Daniel to understand visions and dreams, and it was in such a vision that God revealed to Daniel Nebuchadnezzar's dream and its meaning. Daniel could have received this vision while still awake or while asleep. Praised. The Aramaic word combines the two ideas of to kneel and to bless. In the Bible, this word is always used of praising God and not of praising people. Sometimes, one of the most important things we as believers can do is to ask other Christians to join us in praying for our concern. This brings us to our third question. What are the benefits of inviting others to pray with you in a time of need? There are many scriptures that point out how this is beneficial. One of the main ones being when Jesus said, "If two or more are gathered together, then I am in their midst." Another being one that we went over earlier, which is if two of you ask for something in my name, then it will be done for you by the Father. When you're praying with someone else, literally where you are is now holy ground because Jesus is there.
Right.
So in a world that's so against Christianity, so against God's, rights, what God has decided is right and wrong, what is right and wrong, everything else seems like, demonic ground, like we're in foreign territory. But when two or more gather together, He is in their midst, making the place wherever you be, it's like literally like a home turf, like you're in like the center of a base that's for you. And it's like being returning home from a trip or returning home from being deployed. It's something that God is for us, and so when we're together, He is for us, and He's there, and it can remind us, help build us up. And doing it with someone else can encourage us, to be stronger in our faith, can encourage us to do the right things. And it's just, it's very, very good to do. Next, we will see the content of Daniel's praise. We get to our last section this morning, with Daniel chapter 2, verse 20 through 23, as well as 27 through 28a. And declared, "May the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to Him. He changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with Him. I offer thanks and praise to you, God of my ancestors, because you have given me wisdom and power, and now you have let me know what we asked of you, for you have let us know the king's mystery." Daniel answered the king, "No wise man, medium, magician, or diviner is able to make known to the king the mystery he asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and He has let King Nebuchadnezzar know what will happen in the last days." Daniel made a difference, saving lives because he chose to pray. The name of God, God of my ancestors. God revealed Himself to the nation of Israel by His name Yahweh. The name of God stands for the person of God. To know God's name is to know something of His essence and His character, and to learn what His abilities are as He has revealed Himself. Daniel addressed God in verse 23 using a more intimate expression, God of my ancestors. This is the same God who revealed Himself to Daniel's forebears, Israel's patriarchs, as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If God had not chosen to reveal Himself, if He had not chosen to meet with Isaac, meet with Abraham, we would have no idea of knowing who God is or what He is about. We have know nothing about Him because we simply can't comprehend something so complex. But God has chosen, through His great love and unfailing love for us, has chosen to reveal Himself to us, reveal to us what exactly He is about, how about love, about what is right and what is wrong, and that is very. Without that, we wouldn't be where we are today. We'd be in a much worse place than this.
Mm-hmm.
Be praised forever and ever. Because of who the true God is, he should be praised or blessed constantly. To praise God is to express one's recognition of who God is and one's gratitude to him. It is to acknowledge his greatness and to honor him for who he is. By adding forever and ever, or throughout time and eternity, Daniel's prayer reflects that God should be praised no matter what his answers to our prayers turn out to be. Wisdom and power and knowledge. Daniel voiced the reason God is to be eternally praised. He is the God of all wisdom and power. Wisdom refers to the fact God knows all things and nothing is hidden from him. Power includes the ability and authority to govern the world and all that is in it. God's power enables him to do what he in his wisdom decides should be done. Knowledge is the ability to know what is to be done. Again, this is not a result of a natural intelligence, but is a gift God gives. The wise, those who have understanding. These are parallel expressions. The fact God gives people his wisdom is what makes them the wise. Giving them supernatural insight into that which God makes known by revelation. Receiving the knowledge God gives is what makes one have understanding, or godly insight and discernment. One does not achieve these things on one's own. They are gifts of God. Daniel's prayer emphasizes the giver. We could, have the highest IQ possible, but if we don't accept what it is that God is telling us, then we're just as foolish as anybody else. And there's people that know what it is that, what God has given to us, know what it is, but then refuse to accept it. They could be Elon Musk type of smart, but still wouldn't be smart enough, wouldn't have the understanding to accept what God freely gives. Times and seasons. Verse 21 through 22 give example of God's wisdom and power. Seasons does not refer to the seasons of the year, or to comforting God's people that better times will come. Rather, the expression affirms that all of the course of human history, the times and the epochs, is in God's hands. Whatever happens in time, in the different periods of human history, God is ultimately in control. His power is not limited to heaven. He controls what happens on earth also. Times may refer to the longer periods and seasons to the shorter periods, or there may not be a distinction between the two terms and should be taken together as one expression. When we look through history, especially when you have a history class like I do, we see all these different things that happen, and all these bad things that happen. The Holocaust, yeah, I think that's how you say it. Holocaust, the Black Death plague, something like that. You see all these different things that have caused a lot of human lives, and it's easy to see how people would say there is no God because these things happened. But even the bad things can be used by God to bring about good. Even the things in our lives that seem so terrible that we don't want to remember, that are that bad, God can use that, if you allow him to bring about a magnificent tree that no one else could think of. To use that ground to even though it may look like it's without any water, that nothing could be built there, God could make a mansion out of it. Removes kings and establishes kings. Wars are not beyond the sovereign providence of God. God can and does either bring them into power or remove them from power. Their tenure depends on him, as did Nebuchadnezzar's. This fact should be a great comfort to all believers who live in an uncertain world. Deep and hidden things. Specifically as used here, these terms refer to the meaning of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. More broadly, the expression refers to those things that are beyond human ability on its own to access. However, such things are not beyond God's knowledge or ability to reveal. Deep shows that the truths God knows and can reveal to humans are profound and vast. Hidden things refer to the secrets or mysteries that God had not yet revealed, but that would happen in the future. This means that even if we do not know God's purposes for various events or times in human history, if they are still hidden from us, we should nevertheless know God's purposes are deep. We don't have to know everything. We don't have to, lose sleep over thinking about how is the situation going to work out. Trusting God is all we need to do. Listening for what God would have us do is all we need to do. Trust God and do what He says. When you hear Him say, go talk to that person over there. It could be the most. You could see that person and think, well, obviously that's going to cause trouble. That could be something either in the culture or something like that. Could make you think that you approaching that person could bring bodily harm to yourself. But God is for you. Daniel approaching the king after he already knew the king had sentenced him to death. Easily the king could have just said, "Oh, you're here, thank you for coming, be executed," and that'd be that. Mm-hmm. But he didn't, because God was with Daniel, as He is with all of us who believe in Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. What is in the darkness? This refers to that which is still unknown to us, but is fully known to God, because nothing can hide from Him under the cover of darkness. Light dwells with Him. God is light, and He dwells or lives in light. Nothing can be hidden from Him, as all stands revealed before Him. Therefore, to what us is hidden, the secrets or the mysteries, God knows, because He knows and has planned all things. Thanks and praise. The two verbs together stress the fullness of Daniel's gratitude to God for answering Daniel's prayer. Notice Daniel's personal pronouns at this point. I, my, we, and us. Daniel offered thanks and praise to God because God answered his prayers and gave him the wisdom and power he needed to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream. As Daniel addressed his thanks and praise to God, the word rendered you comes first in the sentence for emphasis, stressing the one to whom all thanks and praise should be ascribed. Also notice that as Daniel thanked and praised God, he included the mention of the supplication of his praying companions, referring to what he asked and what God let us know. You have given me wisdom and power. Daniel closed his praise where he began. In verse 20, Daniel acknowledged that wisdom and power belonged to God. In verse 23, Daniel ended his prayer with thanking God for giving him the wisdom and power he needed and that could only come from God. Wise man, medium, magician, or diviner. That all the various groups of the Babylonian wise men are listed again emphasizes that none of them could reveal and interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Here a different term is introduced, diviner. These men sought to, and believed they could, divide the heavens into various spheres that had influence over human beings, and thus discern the mysteries of the heavens. In contrast to them and their failure, Daniel informed Nebuchadnezzar, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and that this God had a message for Nebuchadnezzar. That such a God exists and is our God should be a great comfort to believers during trying times. The last days. This expression often has an eschatological meaning in the Bible, referring to the events at the end of time. It also was used more restrictively as in the days to come, or in the last part of the present days. Here the phrase obviously includes distant future events leading up to the end of time, because Nebuchadnezzar's dream involved the successive kingdoms of this world, stretching from around 600 BC to the accumulation and the coming of God's kingdom. A long time, but not an interminable time, would have lapsed before all that God revealed to Nebuchadnezzar would be fulfilled. Daniel's God ultimately proved himself to be different in part when he showed that he can reveal mysteries. Job, chapter 38, verses 4 through 7, as well as verse 32. Where were you when I established the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, Who fixed its dimensions? Certainly you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? What supports its foundations? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Can you bring out the constellations in their seasons and lead the bear and her cubs? God, in these verses, was reminding Job of his unlimited power. Regardless of the challenges we face, God's power is sufficient. No type of problem that we encounter, no matter how vast the problem may seem, it could be I know there's one book that I really like. It's called This Present Darkness, and it was a very good book, and it showcases the effect that prayer has. In that book, when people were praying, the angels that were around fighting the demons would get something called prayer coverage, and the angels would get much more stronger. Their plans that they would use against the enemy would be more effective, and it just showed how even when it was only one person praying, how because of him praying, other people were saved, other people were brought in, until a whole town of people were praying, and because of that, they were able to get the dark spiritual forces out of there. All it needs is one, just one person. It's called the remnant. No matter how bad situation is, even Elijah faced this problem in Israel. He thought that nobody else but him was following God. He thought everyone else had turned to the false gods in Israel at that time. But God told him straight up, there are 23,000 people, or some number like that have yet to bend the knee to Baal, that have yet to give in to these things, but stay true to God. No matter how dark, how impossible a situation seems, all you need to do is pray. Because God is for you. He sees things that you don't, the things that are hidden, the mysteries that we can't comprehend. Starts with our last question. When have you seen God solve a problem that was beyond humanly possible? God's answer to our prayers isn't just have to be in normal things like being able to get enough money to reach the next month's rent, things like that. It can also be, the healing of people, and even other things that are, it's very vast. God can do, unimaginable things. And so you can be faced with a problem that you've never heard of before, that seems completely unique to you, and God can still answer that prayer. God's waiting at the door, with the best tools possible to fix that situation. And the earlier you let him in, the better, to fix that problem. Our prayers really do make a difference. Now, 3 ways that we should live it out this week. Start a prayer journal. Begin a personal prayer journal in which you record your prayer concerns. Include information about the concern, the date you added each entry, and space for how God answers your prayers. It could take years before you even hear about how your prayer was answered. When you pray for people that you only met once to be healed, and like 2 years later you get back to that person and you're like, a day later my cancer disappeared, stuff like that. And then you go back to your prayer journal and be like, his cancer, whatever God did for them. When you're praying for yourself, you would see the prayer being answered more quickly than you would if it's someone you don't see often. But our prayers really do make a difference. Next is enlist. Not in the military, but enlist a prayer partner. Invite someone to be your prayer partner for a specific concern in your life. Explain your concern and how you are praying for this issue. Make sure to give updates about how God is working in the situation, even if you are still waiting for him to act. Keeping your friends up to date on the problems that you're facing can help them more adequately pray for what you're facing. It's keeping up to date with other people lets you refresh yourself knowing that God has this. Meeting with other people, even when it seems pointless, can help build up that, just one more day. And eventually one more day is going to be all it takes. All it takes for God, that one day that you're thinking, I'll try for one more day. God answers the prayer that day. The next thing we should be doing is write. Write a response of praise. Think back to a time when God has answered a prayer for you. Write out your response of praise for how He worked in this situation. Say the words out loud to Him as an offering of worship. Let's wrap it up this morning. Prayer is very important, so I encourage you as you go about your day, even if just for a second, when you're just reminded, whenever you think about church, whenever you think about those ideas, just be, Lord, thank you for this day. When you wake up, Lord, thank you for this day. Go about your day, you see someone that maybe has bags under their eyes or just seems like they're troubled with something. Just pray for that person silently. Whatever their name is, please help them, Lord. You don't even have to know what it is. Just God knows, and that's the important part. And so, just pray, and pray. Thank God in prayer. Pray for people in prayer. Just prayer is very universal in what it can do. The answer to literally everything is prayer. Prayer and then do something. It's an important thing. Very important. Now, let's pray it out. Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for all the people that that are praying right now for your will, Lord. They're praying that your will be done. Praying for all the people out there that are hurt. I pray for everybody that's discouraged right now, Lord. I pray that just an extra scoop of your wisdom be put upon them, that their burdens be lessened as they pray, Lord. In Jesus' holy name, amen.
All right, like the lesson says, our prayers really do make a difference. And like Russ said, there may be times you may not hear about the praise. You may not hear of how that prayer was answered, but you praying for somebody really does make a difference. And that's why we always tell you, if you have a prayer request, let us know. We want to be in prayer with and for you. If you have a praise report, let's brag on God. Let's let the world know God is still answering prayers. And so, that's how we let him know, let the world know of what God is doing in answer to our prayers. And so we want to publicize them. We want to broadcast that. We want to let the world know God is here. It may not look like it sometimes, but God is here doing those God things. And so we never want to forget that. Wonderful lesson, and we appreciate that. And so share it with somebody. Let them know that someone that says, well, I've been praying for this for 10 years. It's okay. Pray one more. Pray one more time. Like Russ said, that may be that prayer where God says, okay, now is the time. Because God's timing is not our timing. So, when we think, I want this now, God says no, because he sees the big picture and he knows when to answer that prayer. And so you'll trust him. He knows what he's doing. And so we appreciate that. And we'll be back in about 15 minutes or so with our morning worship about moving forward. And so I invite you to join us for that and send an invite to somebody. You can go to our Facebook or our website, vbff.org, and click on any of those live stream links and go to our YouTube page, and you can copy that code and send it to somebody. Say, hey, come check this out in about 15 minutes. And we'll be here, and then like I said, we won't be here this coming Wednesday, but we will be here the following Wednesday. So we look forward to seeing you in a few minutes. Take care. God bless you. We love you.